The stock story of the day is Nvidia. Always highly anticipated. They reported numbers last night in line, guidance in line, but it wasn't a beat and raise like a lot of investors had become accustomed to. A lot of fuzziness in the numbers and the estimates out there, whether to include China revenue, not to include China revenue. Are you giving the U.S. government its 15% cut? I think the numbers are kind of squishy out there, at least in the near term. That's a CFA term, squishy. Kujan Sobhani, it's his job to kind of make sense of it. He's a senior analyst covering semiconductors for Bloomberg Intelligence. He's based out there in San Francisco. Kujan, love to get your informed opinion about what you saw from the good folks at Nvidia last night.
Yeah, like you said, it was once again a solid sprint and guide. It checked all the fundamental key boxes. But as has been the case with this name, the expectations always run higher. And maybe not all the numbers were able to clear that high hurdle of expectations. Specifically, the data center compute numbers in 2Q, we would have liked to seen that come in a little bit high. But there were still a lot of strong positive underlyings. One, the networking was a significant beat, which shows the strength and the attach rate that they're getting from their networking switches and chips in the Blackwell ramp. Second, like you mentioned, the 3Q consensus had China included, and they still beat their 3Q guide without China. If you add in the China guide of 2 to 5 billion, they would have handsomely beaten the 3Q numbers. So that noisy sort of consensus shadowed the goodness that is coming out of the guide of Nvidia.
All right, so what's the company telling us now about China? Because quite frankly, I'm reading the press. I don't know whether they're going to be able to sell stuff into China or when, or whether they're going to have to give a 15% cut to the U.S. government. How's that going to play out?
Yeah, so China still remains, after the earnings, sort of that overhang in terms of uncertainty. The company did guide to a 2 to 5 billion revenues from the H20 in China in next quarter, which is positive. That means they feel confident that they'll be at least be able to ship some and get some of the revenues back. But yes, the spark here for the China story will not appear until we have a clarity, and we believe until they have a Blackwell version of a China chip, which they get approval from the government. That will really open up a massive amount of revenues coming from China. And there's a lot of hurdles you need to clear, right? There's the government, which has nothing to do with Nvidia. The US-China relationship needs to get sorted out, because now even China can put in a roadblock from Nvidia selling or allowing their companies in China from buying Nvidia chips. So there is work to be done. As you mentioned, the 15% cut is not ironed out in terms of laws. We have heard news stories about potential lawsuits. So those two, government and geopolitical angle, needs to be cleared before we can start seeing billions of dollars of data center China revenue coming in.
Kujan, what's the competitive landscape here for these chip companies vis-a-vis Nvidia and just kind of positioning for AI? I assume Nvidia's position A. Who's kind of B and C?
Yeah, so, this space is divided into two categories. One is the merchant GPUs, which is what Nvidia sells and dominates that landscape. This sort of second competitor there, or the B, is AMD, which is a very far distant. Nvidia today has about over 90% in terms of revenue share. Wow. And the remaining is going to a very small to AMD. But there's other piece, which is what we call ASICs, which is what these big hyperscalers and cloud providers like Amazon and Google design their own chips. So that's sort of the other competitive landscape where there's a risk of the ASICs taking sort of share away from merchant GPUs. Even though they don't compete directly for the same socket, they could take away the wallet share.
And so does that mean companies like Nvidia have to pour money into R&D for that next chip to stay on front? Because I know in your business, technology changes quickly.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, look, Nvidia has been, even before the AI advent happened, Nvidia has been the biggest R&D spender. They have continued, and this is what really got them to this stage of being ahead of everyone else. And they have to continue outspending everyone else to sort of keep that lead. Their roadmap for the next 2.5 years does suggest that they should be able to keep this lead handsomely. And for that, it will definitely require high R&D spending.
So this name, to me, who I'm used to stocks trading at much lower multiples in my world, but this seems like a stock that can actually earn its way, and we have seen it earn its way into its multiple. I mean, you can make an argument this is not an expensive stock.
You're right. I mean, if you look at from a historical perspective, it's actually the multiple is much more lower than what we have seen Nvidia trade in the past 2 years.
Wow.
So, given that fact, and also when we look at the relative comparison, when you think about a company growing at 50% and making revenue in the hundreds of billions, that is unprecedented. Especially growing with gross margins of 70 mid or low 70%. I mean, you're talking about a financial profile of a software company, not a semiconductor company here. So definitely when you take into those two things into account, it does seem that it might not be really highly valued.
Yeah, it's just I've never seen a company like this grow so quickly, so profitably, simultaneously. It's just amazing. Kujan, thanks so much for joining us. You cover all the semiconductor stocks. Kujan Sobhani for Bloomberg.